This week, we're thrilled to have Dr. Annika Goldman join us to explore themes of ageism in Barbie. Annika, would you share a little bit about yourself with our audience?
Hey, everybody. I'm so honored to be here. I go way back with Akanksha. We went to grad school together. I've always been interested in aging and the neuroscience and psychology of aging. That led me to clinical psychology, where I focused on the mental health of older adults. I specialize in geropsychology. So really passionate about mental health, cognitive health, and all the challenges that can come with aging. So really excited to talk about aging themes in Barbie.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today. So, before we jump into the questions today, we're just going to talk about ageism. So, I'm wondering if you would like to define ageism for us.
Sure. Simply put, ageism is prejudice or discrimination on the grounds of a person's age. So this can be any age really, but how we often see it in research and in the media is with people generally over the age of 65. And ageism is a really unique ism because it's one of the very few identities that we all will likely experience if we are fortunate enough to be older. And it has a lot of interesting overlaps with disability. The way we can see ageism is in the media, can be as simple as turning on your TV and seeing all of these targeted anti-wrinkle creams in healthcare. So maybe not referring older adults to needed mental health treatment because there's this preconceived notion that being depressed is a normal part of aging, or that suicidal ideation isn't taken as seriously among older adults. We can have ageism from other people systemically, interpersonally. We can also have internalized ageism, and that's when an individual has very negative beliefs about themselves due to their age. So kind of those internalized negative thoughts. An example of that is an old dog can't do new tricks, and oh, what's the point of me trying something new? I'm too old. I can't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely have heard that before. I know some of the work you've looked at is the positive health factors or resilience factors in older cohorts. Sure.
Words. In popular media and just in conversations, the term old is always associated with that worse, off. There's been lots of studies that show that people over 65 have um, better emotion regulation, more positive well-being, more acceptance and gratitude, higher happiness ratings. Now, that gets complicated when you adjust for certain stressors or income or disability factors. But overall, if we're just looking at age, they're generally similar to other age groups, if not better off when it comes to mental health and well-being. And that's not something we talk about a lot.
I so appreciate you naming that because those are things that I didn't even think about. And I think it goes to show what we were just talking about, as those things are not always highlighted. But it's important to highlight those things because aging is not all bad. Like, of course, there's pros and there's cons, just like with everything in life.
Yeah, the gift of experience too, to put your life in perspective. I don't know if you've talked to an older person in your life and, in my 20s, I may have been freaking out about a certain thing. And then someone's like, oh, yeah, I've been there before. Like, it all worked out. It's no big deal. The resilience that you can look at your history and say, I've overcome a lot of difficult times and I'm okay and I'm still here. So then future challenges associated with aging or life challenges and transitions, you're likely to be better prepared for because you're like, I've seen this and I've coped.
Yeah. My favorite part of talking with older people in my life is learning about their experiences in the past. Like, I loved hearing my mom pass these stories down to me, but my grandfather was in World War II and just hearing
Mhm.
about his experiences being in the Navy, thinking about grandparents and other people in our lives being able to see certain time points in history that we read about in a book. So I love that idea. Always my favorite part of when I talk to people with life experiences or older
Absolutely.
people, we should say. Yeah.
It's so rich. There's a living history. And as a clinician, something I'm always trying to keep in mind is to understand this person's thoughts and beliefs and experiences through the context of where the world was in that time period. So, for instance, I work with a lot of Vietnam vets. And, I didn't live through this time of intense, like, civil rights upheaval and a lot of prejudice against vets. So I try to do some education and historical deep dives for myself to understand what was it like coming back and the backlash they faced from society, and maybe the mistrust from a Black older man is very justified given their experience and mistrust with white providers and discrimination that they've experienced in their lifetime, right? Or an older person who's of LGBT identity, they might be more guarded about their identities because in that time it could have been like life or death. Something I'm always trying to be conscious of is the historical context.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the cultural piece is an important component within this too, that even within the US or outside of the US, there are different kind of views on aging. I know in my context, from the way I see it play out as a South Asian woman from the northern part of India, there's a core value of respecting your elders that I think lines with that idea of their sources of wisdom, experience, blessings.
Such an interesting point, because when you look at kind of socially influenced factors towards mental health or internalized ageism, the views of the culture around aging, really outcomes are so different. And there's been studies on what are the mental health outcomes of older adults in East Asian countries that have, generally speaking, a more collectivist and respect oriented view of aging compared to more Western, the US, who has a lot more kind of ageist beliefs. And we see that there is more internalized ageism, more kind of depression, anxiety, more reported subjective cognitive concerns among people in Western countries or cultures that are less, accepting towards older individuals. So yeah, there's like real measurable outcomes depending on the culture's views of aging, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Ooh, there's so much here. I know we could talk about this forever, but wanted to bring the scene from the Barbie movie where you see Barbie sit next to this older woman on a bench, and she looks over at her and she says, "You're beautiful," and the woman responds with a simple, "I know." And interestingly, I actually saw this interview that Greta Gerwig did, and she shared that studio executives wanted her to cut that scene, saying that it didn't add much, and without it, like, the story would move on. There wouldn't be much difference. Gerwig refused, that if I cut this scene, I don't know what the movie is about. She shared that the older woman on the bench is actually a costume designer, Anne Roth, who's this legend in the industry, which I don't know any of
Really?
this, but there's this whole backstory. And Gerwig noted that this was almost the heart of the movie. She says this idea of a loving God who's a mother or grandmother who looks at you and says, "Honey, you're doing okay." And it describes this like action of grace. I'm curious, like, what came up for you with that scene from this lens of, as a geropsychologist, or your lens of ageism?
I loved this scene. Like it makes me smile thinking about it, because it's it it's so brief and simple, but it's like I know that lady. Like I know these women who are, older, maybe not fitting into this traditional beauty standard, but they have this confident air about them that only comes through like living life and, finding that self acceptance, like apart from whatever other people say and whatever standards there are. Like it reminds me of my grandmother, who was like a performer and she wore big jewelry and she just was so self assured and so inspirational to me in that way, where it's not cockiness, it's just like a comfort in themselves that I really strive to hopefully achieve one day. And it's not to say that that is a given with every older person, because everyone's human and has their own journey to like self acceptance, that they might not reach that. But I just love that like positive example of, an older woman who she's got it. Like, and she knows she's beautiful. And I wonder if that's inspirational to Barbie's character, who's like questioning whether she wants to be mortal, or like questioning the appeal of mortality, one in which you do age and you do lose abilities and things do change significantly. So to see this woman go through all of the mortal messiness and still be seemingly content and believing her own beauty is inspirational to me, and it seems inspirational to Barbie's character.
Yeah, it's such a juxtaposition with the, like, cellulite conversation back at the beginning of the movie. You're like, "That's so silly." When we think about it, like, but this moment was just so powerful, like, just being human with another person and their full
Yeah.
humanity without all the almost, like, BS of how we're supposed to be or look or all these
Mhm.
different kind of problematic standards that we place on women.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think it's interesting too that of course Barbie doesn't have an interaction like this until she gets to the real world. And it just goes to show that even though Barbie Land, of course, uplifted women, there were still some challenges there and some things that Barbie herself didn't even know that she probably was missing and not really getting while living in Barbie Land.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I was noticing as I was watching the movie that all the characters in Barbie Land definitely seemed in this like ageless kind of range of maybe like 20s to top 40, but like it's not sure. And that's not necessarily a criticism. It was just an observation where I'm like, this is supposed to be this full functioning society, but we're only seeing this very specific age range of characters.
Yeah, there's a scene with Gloria at the end that she has her monologue about how the whole thing's so problematic, and even that utopia is problematic in the way it's built. It's highlighting this standard that's being reinforced by Barbies and Barbie Land in a almost like a subtle way that you don't get until that scene, right? Like I don't think it wasn't really I didn't even think about that really the agelessness, which is so true. Barbies are all within their 20s or 30s.
I did a deep dive, and the closest I could find was like a collection of famous women. So they had Rosa Parks and Eleanor
Mhm.
Roosevelt, who in the height of their, fame were over 40, were like into their 40s, 50s,
Older. Yeah.
60s. And the dolls themselves are still kind of, and I
Ugh.
don't know if this was a technical difficulty with manufacturing, but still just have very smooth skin, like maybe have slightly bushier eyes. I don't know. There is nothing that like could indicate age. So that was just an observation. I don't know what the market would be like for little girls to want to play with older dolls. That's maybe a broader conversation, but it it would be interesting to have like Barbie,
Across the lifespan.
yeah, lifespan Barbie. Because they said, she was created what in the 60s, so she would be,
Mhm.
if she was her actual age, she would be older, like in her 60s by now.
Yeah. Yeah, don't make me do math that
Yeah,
quickly.
I
Yeah,
don't
that's
even
such a
think
point.
I don't even think that young girls would maybe want to play with the older Barbies. And I don't even think it's because of like them not wanting to. I think it's kind of like biases that are
Mhm.
unknowingly put on them.
Mhm.
Because like we just talked about all of the beauty standards that are surrounding women and age. And so I think they would probably look at a Barbie that was older, had wrinkles and say, what is this? But that's not the right approach because of
right.
course Barbies were created to inspire young girls. And like you all are saying, Barbie would have been much older now. And it's
Mhm.
supposed to like reflect the current times and reflect what could happen if we all are fortunate, like we said, to live a long life.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
so true.
Yeah, it's like an assumption in itself. But it's also like, what are we shaping for people to bias against? We had the same conversation with Brooklyn a couple episodes ago around weight stigma and how Barbies in themselves are reinforcing this unlivable figure that's just like physically impossible. They like tried to do curvy Barbie, but I don't think there was enough like narrative change around it that then it just continued to perpetuate the same problems of like weight stigma. And so if Barbie's really saying, oh, we're here to like advance women, like it's all about empowering women, like, okay, let's put some money into like, actually educating and helping change some of the narratives around these standards that Barbie's actually upholding rather than the
Mhm.
ones that they're, supposedly fighting against.
It feels intentional that they made the Barbies appear to be in their 20s or 30s.
Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wanted to also mention, if this isn't too steering, but my
Mhm.
other favorite scene was the one at the very end with Rita Perlman's character playing Ruth, who is sort of like the main guide for Barbie in deciding about this existential crisis she's going through. If she wants to like leave Barbie Land and be a human. And she plays this kind of like wise, motherly character. And she says, like, Barbie says, the real world isn't what I expected. And Ruth says, it never is. Isn't that marvelous? And I think it speaks to like this acceptance that can sometimes come with age and wisdom. I think there's also something they say where it's like being human is being uncomfortable and then you die, which is really funny. And yeah, I loved that moment. And it's so common that we see older folks as kind of these mother, grandmother, like mentor figures, which I love. And that's been a lot of my personal experience. And I'd be excited in the future to see an older character of more like the main character who's having their own complex kind of struggles and growth and change that is happening, as well, as opposed to maybe someone in a supportive kind of all-knowing type of role. But that was just one observation I had.
I love that quote. And I love that you are naming the importance of the maternal figures in our lives because similar to you, I have a lot of maternal figures like aunts, and I think that I lean on them a lot in addition to my mom, of course, because we are really close. And I think that those relationships really shape who you are as a woman and even who you aspire to be as a woman. And it also makes me just think about the importance of community, especially for women, because I think that there's a lot of things that we all face, similar challenges that we face, and we don't sometimes even realize it. But that community is so important to navigate challenges and even celebrate wins. So going through the process of motherhood or just getting higher education, all types of things in life, and even just having someone to relate to that knows what it's like to maybe feel unsafe walking down the street or
Yeah.
how do I feel in my body today? Do I not like my body? Am I uncomfortable? What do these clothes make me feel like? I think that it's really a lot of power in community with those maternal figures and just within womanhood.
Yeah, I was reading this post by this writer, Nardis Hale, on Impact about how there's all these studies on how like aunties, right, like are this fundamental part of growth and development of young girls. And we talked about this in previous episodes. Lauren, you were just alluding to this too, in terms of like who are the people who shape how we navigate the world. I think Ruth could be this maternal or even like this older auntie. And it's almost like creating this vulnerable space for Barbies or for little girls to get advice. Steve Biddulph, who does this work around the ways that aunties have this incredibly important role for developmentally in terms of how we can grow and develop over the lifespan or whatever, but particularly true for like teenagers. And so I think that kind of intergenerational component is something that I keep finding us come back to. It definitely shows up in Barbie too.
So many benefits to intergenerational relationships that I think when I say American culture, I should really specify, and this is my own bias, is like white American culture and like how, there's been lots of research and just anecdotally that in, Hispanic communities and Black communities, it's a lot more common to have intergenerational households where people are growing up, being raised by grandparents, like living with grandparents, and that there's benefits to kids, parents, to older adults themselves, that there's like a lot of amazing benefits to being in a household with many generations. Whereas, now in other subsects and then more like white culture, there's just this increasing separation and kind of institutionalization, which is not always bad. There's reasons for that. But I think people are quick to discount some of the benefits of interacting with their older family members or friends. And even I think a lot of people's intergenerational relationships are just family members and not as often, this has been my experience, at least with my generation, like neighbor or coworker or non-family members that they just are friends with. And I think that can be a real loss to not have those people in your life. So that's something I'm also working on.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of fictive kin. And I think that we see that a lot of times in Black and brown households. Like you said, people who are outside of your biological family that you really do lean on as well. And I think that as the world has changed, even your mention of community and interacting with neighbors, you see less of that happening. And you don't see as many people building those relationships and those rapports with other people. So it kind of makes you think, what does this mean for us as a society when we think about aging and when we think about caretaking of those who are older than us.
I really appreciated you naming Annika. And Lauren, you too, around this, like, where we at right now, like with our neighbors and other people. Like, there is so much in terms of like the community. Honestly, I'm cautious sometimes because of just how things are polarized. I'm not saying that's a good thing. That is absolutely my bias and something I want to work on. But just thinking about the current context as a South Asian woman, obviously I have my privileges and I'm also like scared. I feel like it's a double-edged sword. We need community, we need coalition building. And does everybody feel safe in their neighborhood because of how scary things are getting now?
And I wonder if what you're talking about is like, I've kind of heard commonly on social media is this assumption that an older person, especially like an older white person, is going to hold racist beliefs, like conservative beliefs, like anti-LGBT beliefs, things like that. Is that
Yeah.
something y'all like kind of picked up on or
Yeah,
are cautious?
definitely.
Yeah. And I think that
Yeah.
definitely makes sense, like always having to prioritize your own emotional safety and like definitely like reading cues. And I have been like pleasantly surprised with now I live in Durham, which is a pretty like progressive area to be fair, but I think there's a lot of incredible activism and participation being done specifically by older adults that sometimes goes unacknowledged by younger activists is
Yeah.
something I've noticed because there's going to be a different language there that can be sometimes polarizing. Like Rita Perlman's character even said, like sometimes mothers have to stand still so that their daughters can see how far they've come. And so,
Mm.
you know, we might speak a slightly different language in a way than older adults might, like just because of generational gaps. But that doesn't mean that like the work that's been done is not valuable or that there's not helpful coalitions that can be made. Every Wednesday on my street, I see a group of older adults like waving flags for democracy and for, you know, upholding people's rights and speaking out against ICE and like all these really progressive
Mm-hmm.
causes. And I just love to see that because people who are retired have more time on their hands. Just generally speaking, the people who have work, I've
Mm-hmm.
seen a lot of incredible like volunteering of time to meaningful causes. And so I get a little nervous when I see people online and TikToks being like, oh, these older people don't get it. And I'm like, wow, there's so much great knowledge we can source and great time and resources we can source if we're more willing to like have compassion, work together, and maybe find kernels that people agree on rather than kind of, yeah, disagreement. But I recognize that's different than what you were talking about. It's there's just like any people, there are racist old people and homophobic old people, just like there are in middle-aged and young people, right?
So true.
No, Annika, I think that that aligns perfectly because people do automatically assume with the generational gap and age gap that they may think differently than them, but there's lessons to learn because they also have fought their own battles and their own fights, their own movements. And if we did team up together, like you were saying, we could maybe be a more powerful force to reckon with. And Akancha, I did want to also say, I don't think you're being overcautious at all when it comes to the relationships with neighbors, because I remember even living in Georgia, I was by myself and that was the first time living in the South because I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in Maryland. So I was kind of cautious with that too, as far as like the neighbors who I met and who I befriended. And then when people would come to me and be more open, I was like, okay, I think that this is something that or someone that I could rely on or I can have a relationship with. But you do have to think about that, unfortunately, because of the world that we're living in. So I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that's being overcautious at all, but it's a hard thing because we have to figure out ways to find a common ground because like Annika said, everybody isn't like that.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely.
unfortunate. Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
unfortunate that we live in this time where we have to think about those things.
Yeah. The dialectics, as we might say.
I think another kind of trope that I'm just going to get on tangents now that
Yeah.
irritate me on the
Yeah.
discourse
Love
I
it.
hear online from people my age is like, oh, the boomers ruined our country. And I'm like, whoa, okay. Like one day we're going to be the people that Gen Z's blaming for all the problems. And I'm like, yes, surely the better choices could have been made. I agree. And I'm like, okay, but that's also the generation that gave, the right to abortion. They fought for that. It wasn't just
Mhm.
given. That was people on the
Mhm.
streets or equal protections under the law or,
Mhm.
some of these big civil rights movements. We have to honor the elders that came before us that made these rights we take for granted like a possibility. In addition
Yeah.
to we're definitely allowed to criticize too some of the
I think that's such an incredible point. Remembering giants before us have been working on this. It is a marathon, not a sprint, that we will get through
next.
this to help with kind of accessing that radical hope. There are different periods in time that people were fighting for different things around our rights. And that helps me feel a little less hopeless in moments where I need to engage in my own activism and that I am part of this larger movement. Every cohort in some ways is working to slowly move the needle.
Theme in Barbie that we see with like Sasha, railing into Barbie for how like, by today's standards, how like non-feminist and capitalist and fascist
Mhm.
like this company is. But if we take it in the context of the time, like, can we hold two truths? That like, yes, thank goodness by today's standard, Barbie's brand is not enough. But can we
Mhm.
also realize that in the past, it was sort of this breakthrough and like significant progress. So it's kind of fun to play with that tension that is very just generational and um is only Sasha's only able to kind of like name the ways that Barbie doesn't do enough because society has progressed since
Yeah.
then.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I love that. Switch gears a little bit. We want to know what are some positive or more balanced representations of aging in media that you might recommend to viewers. I know that I have one that I had just thought about as we were talking, but I would love to hear, Annika, any of
Yeah.
your recommendations.
Sure. This is my personal shout out for the show Grace and Frankie on Netflix, which I really loved and watched as it was coming out. And what I loved about it was showing these two main characters, older women, and it showed their complexities, their flaws, their growth over time. I think a lot of their characteristics kind of went against like stereotypes of aging, of
Mhm.
just I don't know, they were messy and vivacious, but like working and motivated, and their identity didn't just revolve around being like a mother or a grandmother. So I really liked that. And yeah, I'd love to see
Yeah.
more shows showing like more kind of racial diversity and positive aging. But for
Mhm.
now, it's a great show.
Yeah, I think it is a good example too of what you were saying earlier, Annika, around like representations where it's not the sidekick character, right? They are the
Mhm.
main characters. They are the women are the main characters, not the husbands.
And they
Yeah.
talk about the challenges of aging, like arthritis and menopause and all these things that we don't really hear about much in popular media, but it's not like the main focus of the show. It's kind of just like the realities they're living through. What about you guys?
I love that. I now have to add that to my Netflix watch list because I haven't watched it, but I've heard great things about it. So I'm definitely adding that.
Yeah.
My personal favorite, which I just thought about today, was Only Murders in the Building. I'm not sure. Have you all seen it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I watched the first season, loved it.
Yeah, so I fell in love with it too. I didn't think I was gonna really like it. I knew who, of course, Selena Gomez was, and like my parents have told me like how popular Martin Short and Steve Martin were. And I remember seeing them like in movies, but I was like, okay, what is this? But I love that they are also the main characters with Selena Gomez. So for our viewers or our listeners who haven't seen the show, they're solving murders that happen in their building, and they have a podcast about it. And Selena Gomez is like, I think she's supposed to be in her 30s, and she lives in this high scale condominium that her grandmother left her. And then Steve Martin and Martin Short, they also have a condo there. But then in the condo, Selena Gomez is really the only person in her 30s, and everybody else is older. There is another character who I think is probably close to her age, but all of the other characters are older, and even Martin Short and Steve Martin are helping her solve these murders, but they're very much not, like you said, Annika, sidekicks. They are very much contributing to solving the crimes. And even the other people who live in the buildings, they're giving their 2 cents, and they're very witty and funny. And the writers make jokes about the Martin Short and Steve Martin's age, but they don't center that as the main thing. It's more so about them living their lives. And then my favorite part last season, sorry for a spoiler if nobody's seen it, but Martin Short gets married to, I'm blanking on the actress's name. She's very famous, but she gets
Oh,
married.
is
Yeah.
Meryl Streep in it?
Yes, Meryl Streep.
I need to watch this.
It's so good. And I love that it's a wedding, but it's not Selena Gomez's wedding, or it's not like somebody's grandchild. He's older and he's getting married. This is the love of his life. And so I
I
love
love
it.
that.
Yeah, so I love that show. I think that they do a great job of adding in some humor about age, but not kind of downplaying them or making them feel bad about their age, and still making it nice and fun for the viewers. I think everybody should watch it.
Cool. Good rec. I'm writing it down.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, as we kind of lean into wrapping up, what are some other actions that you might recommend folks take?
Okay, other recommendations. I think broadly, I've heard this phrase of like shifting blame from aging to ageism. Um, and what that means is like, if someone is having trouble operating new technology, often the blame is on the individual, being like they're just so old they can't figure it out. Okay, but actually that's like an accessibility and an education gap of education issue. Like, can we put more of an emphasis on like building platforms that are more age friendly, that have a bigger font, that are less like there's less of a learning curve too. And there's just so many ways we can like increase accessibility kind of on an institutional level. And then person to person, like what we could actually do. I think monitoring our language can be one good step to changing like the broader culture. So once you start noticing it, it's like you realize how prevalent ageism can be, where, I wanted to, and I'm guilty of it myself too. I wanted to come home from a concert last night, leave early, like at 9:30. And the first thought was like, oh, I'm such a grandma. Okay, what does this have to do with age? Like, I just want to go home early. That's not a big deal. Or why is that seen in a negative light? And even in our research, and in reporting, there's phrases like the silver tsunami is coming. Demographically, population of people over 65 is about to just really increase from the baby boomer generation. And there's this weird like fear mongering about it. Like, they're coming and they're going to cause all this infrastructural like challenges for us. And yes, we have to be realistic and thoughtful about accommodating an aging population. And can we talk about it in a way that's less like fear inducing and negative, right? So that can be, calling in friends who are maybe making ageist comments, saying like, hey, like, I don't know, let's not talk like that, because once you're that age, we're all internalizing these negative beliefs that we're all saying right now. And in 40 years, we don't want to be feeling that way about ourselves, right? So we have the opportunity to change now for our own benefit and for other people's benefit. I think continuing to like attune to intersectionality is important, that just to be an older woman versus an older man versus a older trans person, all of that is going to be a very different experience, and not treating age as like a monolith, just for one example. I think building intergenerational relationships is something we can all do. There are some real challenges and realities to getting older that we need community to help with. So, I had a neighbor who had a stroke, and he just something so simple as like pumping the tire, filling up the air in his automated wheelchair, like he couldn't do on his own. I'm so grateful that he asked me to help him. And it was so easy. It took me 5 minutes, and it made like his day increasingly so much easier. And so little things we can do to assist, and also reach out for our own benefit and mentorship in areas, I think can go a really long way. So yeah, those are just some examples. And let me see what else is on my list. I think voting for candidates that support Protecting and expanding Medicare and Social Security is huge. This is a massive problem that is facing older adults right now, where many of them, especially lower income older adults who did not have the opportunity to sock away, millions of dollars for retirement, rely on social services just to stay alive. And those things are at risk with our current political climate. So being aware and trying to use our vote to help secure that for older people is really important. We can also volunteer some time. There's a lot of amazing organizations that are centered on reaching out to isolated older adults. One of them is Meals on Wheels, and we can put a list in there, but there's ones that got popularized during the pandemic where you fill out surveys and you can be put in touch with sort of like a phone pen pal or even just a pen pal of someone who is like a socially isolated older adult. And again, it's not just a service for someone else, it's something that can be really mutually beneficial. I have some other recommendations if you're just looking to learn more. If you're a researcher, then doing research specifically on older adult populations and studying age-friendly interventions is really important, and especially looking at health disparities among older non-white populations. I think the research on older adults tends to be skewed towards white populations, and so there's a really important gap in research there, and probably, I know in mental health, but I'm sure that can be said for almost all areas. There's something called the Reframing Aging Initiative, and it gives a lot of guidelines on if you're a researcher or a reporter or someone who writes about aging, how you can use more inclusive language and it's like a toolkit of what language can be most inclusive. There's a great book from Ashton Applewood and also a TED Talk we can link called This Chair Rocks. It's all about ageism, the impact of ageism, and how we can combat it. There's a wonderful article that was written by Dr. Alicia Smith-Tran. I love this title. It's called Pushing Back on Black Don't Crack. And it's all about how culture leads a youthful appearance. And the author talks about the negative impact that can have in the intersection between racism, sexism, and ageism, specifically with Black women. And finally, a personal fave is an influencer called Welcome to Heidi. And she is in her 60s. She's on TikTok and Instagram. She does like cute outfit of the day videos and sort of like personal advice and like inspirational stuff. And I'm like, she's so stylish. I want to be her when she gets older and just have a lot of like age-friendly messaging. So that's where I'll stop for now.
Those are so great. And I love that you've given a beautiful array of things that, we'll have in the show notes.
And I want to name too that for folks who don't see the video, but I'm 30 years old, so do not consider myself an older adult. So it's a personal interest, a professional interest, and something I study, but not something I can speak to from personal experience. So I hope that maybe one day you'll be able to interview someone and ask more about their point of view. But glad to be like an intro to some folks who've maybe never dove into this topic of ageism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we so appreciate you sharing your perspective. Like you say, even though you don't identify as an older adult, I think that you brought such a rich discussion today. And like Conscious said, gave our audience so many different resources and ways that they can continue to contribute and build community around themselves and with others.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm so honored and big fan of Woke and Witty podcast. Come back.
Yay.
Thank you.